peptide craze, perimenopause panic, and the ever confusing experience of being a woman. Ends today. Every burning and panic inducing question you've ever had about your changing female body gets answered today.
And the truth is, after fourth grade health class, fear mongering us about how awful periods are, no one actually educated us on how to take care of our bodies, not even our parents for most of us.
And we are sick and tired of women getting their health information from social media and Reddit instead of getting it directly from the science supported by research. That's why we created this podcast, and that's why we only bring on the most credible, no BS guests to educate you fully on the topics that scare us the most, but with the most research-based support we can find, especially from women who've dedicated their entire lives to creating the answers to all of the misinformation that we're fed.
And last month, I had the very special opportunity to present on a women's longevity panel with today's guest, Dr. Rachele Pojednic. Dr. Rachele is the Chief Science Officer at Restore, where she runs Restore Labs. She got her PhD from Tufts Friedman School of Nutrition Science and Policy, then did her postdoc at Harvard Medical School inside the Joslin Diabetes Center and the Spaulding Rehabilitation Hospital. She holds a faculty appointment at Stanford, research appointments at Harvard's Institute of Lifestyle Medicine, and Edith Cowan University's Nutrition and Health Innovation Research Institute. And she sits on the board of governors for the American College of Sports Medicine Exercise is the Medicine Initiative. She's been NIH funded through the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute and the Vermont Biomedical Research Network. And for over 20 years, she's coached Olympic, Division I, and tactical athletes on nutrition. Her work has been featured in the New York Times, NPR, Time, Oprah Daily, and the Wall Street Journal, Stat News, Self, Women's Health, and Forbes, and now the Overthinking podcast. Can you believe it? So the translation is, when it comes to peptides and all women's health anything, she's not giving you a TikTok answer. She is giving you the hard, cold truth, and she's giving you the research.
This episode was so juicy, we had to split it up into 2 parts because we truly could not hold ourselves back from answering all of your burning questions from Dr. Rachele.
So this is part 1, where we help you identify, am I in perimenopause? And if so, what the fuck do I do? And in part 2, we are going to end with a bang, giving the girls the honest, juicy truth about peptides, what they are, what the science says or doesn't say, and when peptides will be available for you to try. So, Dr. Rachele, thank you for coming on the show.
Elsie, Bree, I am so thrilled to be here. Thank you so much. And thank you for platforming science. What an exciting day, because it doesn't happen very often.
Yes.
No.
We're happy to do so. And I think Bree and I both have the humility of we don't know everything. So that's why we bring on guests that are trying to know the everything.
And for the record, that is something that scientists say all the time, which I think is what drives people crazy, is we are often the ones that are like, we don't know the answer to that. And people are looking for an answer. And that's where everybody gets so confused, because they're like, wait, the scientists don't know? No, we know what the science says, but we're not making crazy claims around it, which is probably what you're finding out there on the internet.
100%.
And just to highlight that, if someone, especially in research, is like, no, this is exactly the answer. This is exactly the answer. Maybe ask twice, because Dr. Rachele is very humble, but also coming from a place of, we don't know all the answers, but when we don't know, we say, I don't know, instead of giving a fake answer. So before we get into all things peptides and perimenopause, we wanted to welcome you with our favorite little game called This or That. So, would you rather never get to travel again or never get to work out, like sweat, exercise ever again?
Definitely never get to travel. That's a tough one, honestly, emotionally for me, but sweating and exercising is my lifeline. So I would have to choose that one for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think ditto on that. I think you can do without travel, but you really can't neglect your health.
Indeed.
I feel like the only way for me to not select to work out all the time would be to travel so that I could get the fuck out of everyone's way, because I would be a wreck.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Good
So
point.
I'm with you guys.
So let's move into some of the topic today. Today, obviously, we mentioned we're going to be talking about peptides and perimenopause. So we want to start by just getting a little background on you, Rachele. Where did you decide to dedicate your life to science, specifically for women's health?
Yeah. So I am a scientist in this space now, not by intention, but kind of happenstance. So I think, like many people, we have circuitous routes to where we get, right? So I started out way back in the day as an exercise physiology major in Boston. My first job was a personal trainer at Bally's Total Fitness. So if you know Bally's, you are a
Rallies, wow.
What a throwback.
vintage. Yeah, it's a throwback. And then just kind of followed that trajectory throughout the years. I thought for a long time I was going to go to medical school, and that just didn't fit with me. I taught middle school for a while, got really into coaching, which was really fun. And then went back to school and just started really thinking about performance and aging and longevity. It was funny. I was studying people when I was doing graduate work that were 80, 90, 100 years old women, and people were like, "Why do you want to study old people?" And I'm like, "Well, because if you figure out what breaks later on in life, you can work backwards and find the levers that you can pull to be helpful to your future self." And then most recently, I'm 45. I am in the throes of perimenopause, and I'm looking around just like everybody else. And I'm like, we've studied women that are postmenopausal. We've studied young women. Why is there no data in the middle? And so that's kind of where I've landed now, is that somebody has to start doing this research. And it feels really exciting to be able to have that opportunity. So that's where I'm landing now.
Ugh,
Amazing.
and no one better than you, truly. And so when we think about, your background from before you were in coaching, you've been in fitness, you've been in movement. What do you like? What was kind of like that cornerstone of like, okay, I need to go into research specifically? Because you were doing fitness and coaching. Like, when was that one moment for you?
Yeah. So when I was in grad school, I really started to notice that there was this major disconnect between these two worlds, right? So I'm sitting in my classes getting my master's degree, and I was at Tufts, as you mentioned. It's in biochemical and molecular nutrition, which basically means I drilled way down into what nutrition does in the muscle. And I'm sitting in classes all day, and then I'm going to the gym later on that afternoon, and I'm realizing we're all moving in the same direction and nobody's talking to each other, right? Like everybody in the fitness industry, that was when social media was really starting to get hot, are Googling everything or consulting. At the time, it was Instagram or YouTube. Now it's TikTok. And I'm sitting in my classes and just being like, what I am learning here is not what is being said in the world that I am, exercising literally in. And
Yeah.
so I started to really think about, I need to take this to a deeper level. And that's when I started to work on my PhD. And at the same time, really started to think about, how do we bridge the gap between these two spaces? How do we communicate these two worlds together? And so that's when I started not only thinking about doing the research, especially in muscle and vitamin D and women's health, because nobody knew the answers back then, especially the people that I was palling around with at the gym that were also like, everybody should take a supplement and you should be, exercising. And so I really just saw this opportunity to pull these two worlds together. Can we do the research? And while we're doing the research, communicate it to the practitioners, i.e., the trainers, the coaches that are actually doing the work on the ground. And it's been kind of a long road, and I'm still not sure we're there, but that was my why when I started to do the research, is to really think about, how can we get good information in the lab and translate it where it matters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's so important, especially I think we have like a scientific literacy gap where a lot of the regular population, people who don't have masters and beyond, don't really know how to interpret data. And so we need those middle people who are like, I'm going to take all the sciencey stuff and make it make sense for normal people.
It's been one of the superpowers that I've developed, is how to make really complicated science easy for people to understand. And one of the things that actually does drive me kind of crazy, especially in the world that we live in now, is that any influencer can go on to PubMed, which is the clearinghouse or the search engine, if you will, of human subjects research, especially in our world, and slap it onto a post. And I go and I dig in and I'm like, well, that's not what that study said at all. Or that study was in rats, or
Yeah.
that effect size, which is kind of like the amount of movement that you would see in an outcome is like tiny. Why would we use this as evidence?
Right.
And so this whole idea of you've got to do your own research, or I've done my own research. I'm like, well, that's not exactly research. And so that's something that I'm super passionate about as well, is not just
Yeah.
even translating the data, but also translating this idea of what is scientific research. Because
Yeah.
we as scientists, I say this all the time, we suck at social media. We are so bad at it. And as a result, we've kind of like abdicated the space. People don't know our science. They don't know what the scientific process is. To your point,
Yeah.
Kelsey, there's this huge scientific literacy gap. And so that's something that I also advocate for as well, is what are scientists actually doing? Because as it turns out, we're just normal human beings going to work every day, following a procedure. But people think that we're kind of like mystical creatures. So it's something that I try to normalize as well.
It's
Totally.
so interesting because I do feel like influencers are like, they know what the people want. But then the researchers and the scientists are like, we just know what it is. Whether you like it or not is kind of not our fault. It's kind of not our business.
Facts don't
But
care about your feelings.
we don't care about your feelings. We're giving you the data. And I think that's like the beauty of it all. And I am curious to hear, what would you categorize, or how would you describe, like, what is true research?
Yeah.
What is
So I
true
think
science?
Yeah, the one thing that I think is so important for people to understand is that science is a series of steps to understand outcomes. We don't go into it with preconceived notions. We are setting a hypothesis, setting up an experiment to either prove or disprove our hypothesis. Um, but that only leads to more questions on the back end. We never get to a point where we have proven a thesis or we have proven an outcome. A really good example, specifically for women's research, is thinking about some kind of a supplement that you study for 12 weeks at a time in men. Does that translate to women? Maybe,
Maybe.
maybe, or maybe not. So we have to ask more questions. And I think that's something that really frustrates people, is they're just like, we just want to know the answer. And the truth is, with science, is that we get more answers that only lead to more questions. And so that's the process of science that's so important. One of the headlines that kind of drives me a little bit crazy that you see a lot is science says. Science doesn't say anything. The scientific process will potentially answer questions, but science doesn't actually say anything. We've never really definitively proven anything, which is kind of like exploding head emoji for people, right? They just can't, like, what do you mean we don't know the answer? Well,
Yeah.
It's
that,
almost like science
that
asks.
yes, yeah,
Science wonders. Just
exactly.
like us. Yeah.
Exactly.
Biases say.
Science, yeah, sure. Yeah, scientists say. So that is something that, again, it always sort of like cracks me up when I see influencers using the, like, the PubMed ID and science says as their hook, and I'm like, that's not exactly it. However, to your point, Bree, just a second ago, is the influencers are really good at getting you to pay attention, and it's something that I think these two worlds can really learn from. Scientists are, as I mentioned, really terrible at social media, but they should be better at it so that people understand the process and the nuance of the outcomes that we are creating in the lab. And if we could get with some really good influencers or some really good marketing people, my marketing people at Restore are brilliant. We
Yes.
could probably be moving the needle much more effectively on understanding the scientific process and the outcomes that we are discovering in the lab. But my academic world has been pretty resistant to that, which I think is a real problem in the space that I live in on the academic side of my life.
I know quite a few MD PhDs, and I love them because I like that they can speak intelligent to me. I can't always interpret everything, but I appreciate their intellect. And I think sometimes that ego is clouded by the or clouded from the lowest common denominator,
Mm,
where you've earned your right to like speak intelligently and use these words, but we kind of leave behind a large portion of people who are trying to understand, who are afraid, and then it
yes.
creates this gap even further where we have this information or, you know, questions about information, and what people in the fear zone gravitate to is like, I want certainty because that makes me feel safe. And that's where we land with social media, specifically for women who are having all of these complications in their life, like perimenopause or questions around peptides or GLP-1s or whatever it is. We have all these questions and then we lean into that fear. And so they end up going to the influencer who is, kind of cathartic towards that feeling.
And they get you to watch by saying, "Hey, don't look further. I got the answer here for you. You don't have to worry. It's right here." And then now you trust me because I just made your fears go away. Now you feel safe, right? But I think that's a huge point is like women's health at baseline hasn't had enough exposure. There hasn't been enough like that we've been able to do with it. So now if we were able to pair influencers with all of this cutting edge research that you're doing and the questions that we are truly asking about women's health, not just like, am I going to get fat when I hit 45? It's like, we're not even talking about that. We're talking about like what actually happens in my body, educate me on the nuance that I need to keep an eye on, and then give me the variety of things that could potentially help and give me the education to choose it. And I think that's where, like you said, we're just getting stuck in the tell me exactly what to do and then put the blinders on.
And I am very critical of my field. If you listen to me on other podcasts, I say this all the time. It is our fault that we have created this vacuum because I use the word abdicated this space and we created this vacuum where people were looking for answers. And I don't fault people for that, right? Like, especially women. But I will say something that's very funny to me about the women's space is that there's this storyline that's true that gets thrown around in our world in the exercise and performance space that only 6% of data is in women. You've probably heard about this. And so everybody's like, there's no data in women. And then they'll turn around and give you a definitive answer about what to do in this space. And I'm like,
The
well,
irony.
yeah, if there's no data, how do you know the answer here? And
Right.
so that is, it's this tension that we need to navigate right now. And what an amazing time to be. I'm a glass half full kind of girl where we can start to do this work. We can start to answer questions for women that, for the first time, I would argue in sort of like our genealogical history here, are asking questions about this time of life. We were laughing, Bree, you might remember in the presentation that we did, is that so many women were raising their hands and they were like, my mother never talked to me about any of this. Like, this was taboo. We didn't talk about it. At the same time, in parallel worlds, all of the scientists were men and they couldn't care less about studying this period of life. And so we have this amazing opportunity to start answering questions. The problem is that science moves slowly. It takes a long time to do good science. And so in the meantime, we need to find a way to bridge these gaps where the influencers are communicating with the scientists to get good information to women so that they can, Brie, I'll mimic what you just said, make good decisions for themselves based upon the data that we do have. And coming back to what we started with, what we don't know yet. And there's a lot of times that I'll talk to women and they're like, this thing seems to be working for me. And I'm like, well, there's no data to support it, but if it's working for you and like everything's safe and the dose is good and there's no adverse experience that you're having, like, thumbs up, sister, like, go for it.
I
And
think
so,
that's the third part of it too, is
yeah,
like there's the what the science says, there's what I've been educated to do, and then there's the self-trust of I know what the self-awareness of like I know when my body feels good and doesn't. So whether it's placebo or not, if I feel good, that's okay. Like I think that's something to say on the loudspeaker for women of like we've been told this is good, this is bad, and moralized so much of what we do for our health that it's like I don't care if someone else says it's bad, but if it's working for you and it's obviously healthy, then, or for the most part, like, I think that's okay.
And for the record, placebo is an effect, right? Like,
Right.
it's been
Yeah.
well documented. If you're feeling good and you're telling yourself, I'm feeling good, that actually does physiologically change your body.
Yep.
So I work with a researcher out here. Her name is Allie Crum. She runs a lab that is called the Mind Body Lab, and she does a ton of work on mindset. And it is
Mm.
fascinating how powerful mindset can be for people. She's got some beautiful studies looking at real physiologic outcomes just simply by changing the way that people are perceiving the environment around them, specifically with exercise and nutrition. And it's wild to see how effective just simply thinking differently about something can be for people's bodies.
Yeah.
That's so
So I
awesome.
think we should get into the meat of this episode, which is why everybody's here and kind of what you're touching on. Like, we don't know a lot about women's health at certain stages. So, can you tell us a little bit about what perimenopause is? What's happening in the body? What are the symptoms that we can start to look out for? Generally, what's the time frame that women experience this?
Sure.
The good, bad, and the ugly, please.
Yes. It's something that I think that people forget a lot, the good part, about
Yeah.
this stage of life. So I'll just start with kind of like the physiologic, definition is essentially perimenopause happens in women, typically between the ages of about 30 and 52. So it's a huge range as we are discovering where your hormones, this is not a technical term, but it should be, are just kind of going crazy, right? Like they are just resetting after your reproductive years have started to wind down. And that's from a physiologic perspective, not necessarily a choice of when you want to have children. And so, what we start to see are fluctuations in your major sex hormones, so estradiol and progesterone specifically. And so we just see that they start following kind of an unregulated path. So prior to that, you would have your very typical menstrual cycle, which is on average 28 days, fluctuations between different stages of your sex hormones. And the interesting thing about this is actually everybody wants to talk about menstruation as if it's like a very regular 28-day cycle. As we are doing more and more research into this space, what we find is that not only is it not regular person to person to person, but it's not regular in the same person month after month after month. And so when we start to enter this perimenopause stage, we start to see that even if you had a fairly regular pattern, that pattern starts to become dysregulated. And you potentially start to experience symptoms. And I say potentially on purpose. Not everybody experiences symptoms. Like, not everybody experiences menstrual cramps. Like, not everybody experiences PMS. And
Mm.
so, if you are experiencing symptoms, they can show up as brain fog, which is really hot to talk about right now. They can show up as different uh, GI issues. They can show up as not being able to sleep at night, hot flashes. And so, all of these things are potentially going to happen because of this dysregulation of hormones. And then eventually, what happens is you stop menstruating, typically around about the age of 52, give or take. That's the average. And essentially, your estrogen levels, your estradiol levels go down to about zero. And that is a really distinct moment in time. It's actually defined as one moment in time where you have not had your menstrual cycle, so you haven't bled for 12 months. And then after that, you are in menopause. So perimenopause is before that 12-month period, that one point in time, and then menopause is that post period.
That's so crazy to me because you could be in perimenopause for what? How many years? Like years and years.
Yeah, it's actually really interesting. What we're also seeing too, I mentioned, like when you want to start timing when you're having children, what we're recognizing now is that a lot of women are in perimenopause when they are having babies. So they'll literally go from their like postpartum period straight into perimenopause. So they go from erratic hormones due to the postpartum period straight into a dysregulated menstrual cycle due to perimenopause immediately after. So it's a super fascinating time right now for
That sounds
women.
horrible.
Lord help us. Not all heroes wear capes. If your mom was one of those, give her an extra hug.
Oh,
Wait,
yeah.
so
Oh,
I want
yeah.
to highlight though, because I think this is interesting. Like you can be in perimenopause for so long, but when we talk about menopause, it is literally just one moment in time
It
where
is
it's been a
literally
year.
one moment in time.
And then after that, you're postmenopause.
Yeah. So one thing
Okay.
that's interesting, especially for women that are doing like research or clinicians in this space, a term that they don't really like is this idea of I am menopausal, right? You are either peri or premenopause, or you are postmenopause because menopause is this one period, this one moment in time where you have not menstruated, you have not had your period for 12 months. Um, and that just to dig in a little bit further, because it's so fun to be a woman, it is really challenging to actually pinpoint that moment in time because it
Mm,
might be for women that you go 6 months without getting your period. And then all of a sudden you're like, what the, like, all right, the clock starts over at that point. So
Damn it.
it is, yeah. So it is a really hard moment in time to pinpoint. And most women, unless you're very diligent about tracking your cycle, don't really know when that moment happened
Yeah.
because you'll just be like, oh, shoot, like it's been, I don't know, you're like counting on your fingers, like, when is the last time that I actually had my period?
And I
Um,
think in light of that, it's important for us to know our health and have data points throughout every age, every stage. So if someone is like maybe experiencing some of these symptoms, what should she be asking her doctor to track? What should she look out for? Is there labs that she wants to measure?
it's a great question. So I think the best thing that all women can do is just keep a track on when you start your period. So when you start your bleed, just click it on your Aura ring or mark it on your calendar if you do that, with a pencil and paper.
Do you have a favorite app that you use?
I do wear an Aura ring and
Okay.
they're pretty good at tracking that. Yeah, I've been traveling like crazy, so you can see I'm holding my hands up here, and I went totally analog for the past 6 weeks because I knew I was gonna be in 17 different time zones and I was gonna be sleeping like crap, and so, I don't need that kind of negativity in my life where, you
totally.
wake up in the morning, Bree, you have an Aura ring on where it's like, "You've slept terribly." I'm like, "I know, I'm aware, thank you."
You're like, don't make me feel worse. Okay.
Yeah,
I
Thanks,
need to have a
Captain
exactly.
good breakfast and
Obvious.
a
Yeah.
workout. Okay. I can't be looking at my bad score right now.
And
Yeah.
we can talk about that in a second too, about how that can be really detrimental to your overall mental health. But I think that's a great way for women to start is just old school, mark on your calendar when is the first day of your bleed. And it will also help you be able to count down those days in between the times when you are menstruating. So you'll remember just a second ago, I was talking about the typical cycle we say is 28 days. Yours might be 26, it might be 32, and that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with your menstruation. That doesn't mean there's anything wrong with your cycle. That just means you're you. And if that is consistent month after month, it's totally cool and it's totally fine. So that's one part. Now, here's where things get tricky, and this goes to the diagnostics. Everybody right now wants to be testing their hormones, and I get it, right? I'm a scientist. I test everything. I am big into diagnostics. The problem with testing hormones is that for the most part, you are testing them at a snapshot in time. And so if you think about sex hormones specifically, they will fluctuate not only day to day, but we're actually also starting to realize is that they will fluctuate within a day fairly significantly. And so if you go and get your hormones tested, you need to go in eyes wide open as to what you might find, and it might not actually indicate that anything is wrong. So this is the part that I find exciting, again, opportunity, glass half full, is how can we actually start to be tracking these hormones throughout a menstrual cycle for women, minute by minute, day by day, much like your Aura tracks your HRV or your heart rate. And there are some products coming on the market that I think are starting to tap into this. But right now, if you go and get your blood or even your urine tested, if you're not testing it every hour on the hour for 28 days straight, you're not going to get a very good picture of what's going on in your body. Not to say
Mm,
don't do it. I do not ab- advocate for gatekeeping. That actually does, I don't like that either. So I talk to a lot of my clinician friends, and my, very fellow perimenopausal women will go in and they'll be like, I want to get my labs tested. And they'll be, no, we're not doing your labs. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't tell you anything. Well, that's not helpful either to the woman
right.
sitting across from you in your office. Test them, sure, but just be really clear on what you're looking at, what the test is actually showing, so that, again, back to what you were talking about, Bree, in the very beginning, that woman can make a good decision for herself based upon the information that she has. That being said, ladies, be really careful about the one off testing, because you're only seeing 1 minute of your complete cycle, and it might not be telling you what you think it is.
That is, thank you so much for saying that, because obviously we can say it, but when you say it, it's like not all the data is telling you black and white, yes or no. And we literally started this podcast by saying that if it looks like a yes or no, then it's probably not something to trust. But having knowing that and kind of being up for the nuance of it all, as a former health coach and fitness coach, and also someone who's in perimenopause right now, how can the women listening to this like protect their bodies, fight against the low libido, midsection tire, all the horrors that we hear? How can we actually make a change today to support our bodies?
Yeah. I'm going to take that in two parts. So, the first, I'm going to come back to diagnostics really quickly, because you use the word protect our bodies. And I think this is really important. I talked about
Yes.
this a bit when we were in the panel that we did. One of the things that you can do is get your blood tested every year or every 6 months or so, and pay attention to the metrics that matter. So,
Mm,
when you look at the metrics that matter, the things that are going to get us in the end as women are diabetes, cardiovascular disease, potentially some different cancers, right, way down the road. And so, what you want to be doing is actually tracking those metrics that indicate where you are from a health perspective over time. I use this example all the time. One of the metrics that I think is really important to test is your hemoglobin A1C. This is a test that will show up on any blood panel that you get from your doctor. So you probably have had this done for the last 20 or 30 years if you're 40 some odd years old, and you can go back and look at it. And when you look at hemoglobin A1C, this is a metric of how much sugar has been circulating around in your body for the last 3 months. It's a pretty good metric on what your metabolic health is in general. And so, what tends to happen with women is that you go to your doctor, you're 45 years old, and all of a sudden your hemoglobin A1C is somewhere around 6%, which is pre diabetic. And your doctor starts freaking out and says, like, oh my goodness, you're in the pre diabetic range, shaking their finger at you. You got to exercise. You got to, eat your diet, change your diet, the whole thing. And you're sitting there and you're like, and also I've got this like belly fat in the middle. And what actually probably happened is at age 20, you got your hemoglobin A1C tested and it was 5.4, which is very normal. And then you got it tested at 25 and it was 5.6, which is very normal. And then you got it tested at 30 and it was 5.7, which is borderline. And your doctor probably didn't say anything. And then you're 35 and it was 5.9, which is also kind of borderline. And maybe they said something to you in your doctor's appointment, but you didn't pay attention. And all of a sudden you're 40 and it's up in the sixes and everybody's losing their mind because you have prediabetes. When in fact, you could have been watching that metric change over time, exactly right. And it was normal, 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 normal until it wasn't. But what we weren't seeing was that increase in trajectory over time. And I think that's the most important thing to pay attention to, because all of a sudden you hit 45 and you're like, what the hell happened? Well, most of the time, if you go back and you look at your biomarkers over time, it was a pretty gradual increase that you just didn't recognize until all of a sudden somebody put you into the yellow or the red zone on your EHR when you got that metric back and your feedback from your doctor. And you're like, "Oh my goodness, like how did this happen?" Well, it happened gradually over time. And Bree, to your
yeah.
point, is like now I've got the belly fat in the middle and I've got brain fog and all this thing. And it turns out it was because you were becoming slowly metabolically unhealthy over time. These things don't tend to happen overnight unless you've got some kind of a disease. And so this is where I start to advocate for our younger selves. And I'll come back to our current selves in just a second. But we need to start talking to younger women about this. Like, start paying attention when you're 18, 25, 30, 35, because perimenopause doesn't just happen to you. It is a gradual process due to exposure, time in the world, and age. And
Mhm.
so, coming back to us that are now in this space, we also have to be really cognizant that, like, this didn't just happen overnight. And if we want to get out of that, fat in the middle or the brain fog, we got to put the work in order to reverse those decades of
Mhm.
accumulating damage that was happening to our bodies. And again, this comes back to, I love to circle back to make sure that we like close the loop on everything. This comes back to all these influencers giving you the quick fix. There is no quick fix here. This is consistency. This is dedication. This is making sure that you show up in the gym, in the kitchen, with your social connections over time in order to slowly reverse this. You didn't get here overnight, and you, if you're feeling bad, are not going to get out of it overnight either.
Yeah. So a lot of those levers that we talk about on our podcast are make sure you're lifting at least 3 times a week. Make sure you're doing some sort of cardiometabolic activity. Those are the important levers that we can pull while we are in our 30s, 40s, 50s that will impact our 60s, 70s, 80s. And it's kind of one of those things when you're young, you're like, oh, this doesn't apply to me. I don't have to worry about it because I'm young. We take that for granted. But why we have this podcast is like, we're not going to miss the forest for the trees and say, check your hormones so that you can get the appropriate supplement or the appropriate peptide.
HRT
We want you to
prescription.
be doing, yeah. And that might be clinically indicated, but we want you to make sure you're doing the big levers first because having more muscle is like your longevity insurance. It will help protect you from some of these cardiometabolic metrics, right?
It's funny. I feel like we are so like-minded. We are kindred spirits. I talk about levers and little levers all the time. And also this idea of insurance. I say muscle is your 401k, right?
Yes.
Like, it is the most metabolically active tissue in your body. It will
Right.
be the protective tissue if and only if you pay into it, right?
Mhm.
So you're not going to show up at retirement age and expect to have a nice 401k unless you have been putting 100, $200 a month into it since you were 25 years old. It's
Yep.
just not going to happen. And
Yep.
muscle works exactly the same way. Not that it's ever too late. I have worked with women that are 80, 90, 100 years old, and you can increase your muscle. You can make it more metabolically active at any age. But if you can start earlier, it is your insurance plan. It
Yep.
is your 401k for yourself later in life. The other
It's
thing I
like,
just want to tap into really quickly that I think is really important, and I'm sure you've talked about it on your podcast before, but for those of us that are in our 40s that have younger daughters as well, one of the moments in time that I think does not get enough attention but really needs to is actually a very critical window for bone health.
mm,
So when I talk about muscle, it is malleable at any time in your life. 30, 60, 80, 106. All of these times you can train your muscle. However, bone, especially for women, is different. So you are accumulating your peak bone in your adolescent years, 13 to about 18 years. That's where you're laying down the hardest bone that you are going to lay down for the rest of your life. You reach, as a woman, peak bone mass between the ages of roughly 18 to 23. And from then on in, it is a preservation game. There is no way to build significant amounts of bone later on in life. There are some indications that exercise, specifically resistance training and some impact training, and some drugs later on in life, if you've got an osteoporosis diagnosis, can move the lever ever so tiny much. But the big lever that you have to pull for bone health is in that critical window of about 13 to 18. And so we also need to be talking to our girls to be moving, to be exercising, to participate in sports, to find the thing that they love to move with at that young age so that they set their literal 70-year-old self up for success. Because if they don't hit it at that young age, they are going to end up with a diagnosis of osteoporosis or osteopenia later in life.
This makes me a bit sad for like our younger selves, right? Like I imagine 19-year-old Kelsey in the college dorms who didn't even weigh 100 pounds till my freshman year at 5'7", who was so small and frail. And I just didn't really know how to eat, right? Like I lived off Dr. Pepper and mac and cheese in the college dorms. And I'm like, if I could just go back and tell her, one, to go to the rec center and just lift anything, run around the
Anything, any
track,
machine.
lift anything, do anything. And also maybe eat a little protein a couple times a day. I wish that I could go back. So I think having this platform and saying exactly what you're saying now is we're trying to speak to people who are in this stage or in their 30s, the things that you can do now. Yes, you may not be able to lay some of that foundation of your bone, but you can still do so much. The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is today.
You got it.
Mic
100%.
drop. Okay, a very quick question. What if someone on this podcast has a younger daughter, a younger teen, and they're like, but I've heard lifting weights at that young of age is actually bad for you. What do you say to that person?
This has been debunked over and over and over and over again. The worst thing that happened to your kid is the same thing that can happen to you from an injury perspective in the gym, is that they like drop a weight on their foot, right? Like that's the worst thing that could happen. The best thing that can happen is that they've got good, hard, solid, robust bone, and they've started their 401k early with their muscles in the gym. There is no younger limit for getting yourself into the gym. And not that you necessarily need to put your 5-year-old under a bar, but there's like ways that you can help them, right? Like let them play on the playground, hanging off the bars, letting themselves drop off the bars to the ground, or jump on a trampoline, or do a jump rope, or run around the playground. There are ways that you can make gym type movements relevant to different ages, but put them in the gym. Like let them lift heavy stuff. It is the best thing for them, especially for our girls.
Make them carry in all your groceries from Costco.
Exactly. You know, the other thing that's really, this is not a space that I work in, although I have had this happen to me, is we see ACL tears pretty regularly with young girls. And everybody wants to be like, oh, is it because they're in the luteal phase or like, you know, whatever. As it turns out, the data just keeps pointing to the fact that young girls were not active enough when they were young and started to be asked to be active on sports teams in a way where their body was not prepared for later in life. And so they pivot funny, or they are just sort of like a little gangly and wonky. And the reason for that keeps coming back to this idea of they just didn't train well young. Whereas our boys, we put them in the gym, they go with their dad to, you know, football practice, like whatever. And so the boys are just getting those functional movements a lot earlier than the girls. And then they all get to high school or college and we're asking them to do the same level of activity. And the girls have just not been physically prepared in the same way that the boys have. So get our girls out there, get them under a bar, get them in the gym, get them doing these functional movements as early as we possibly can.
That you are just nailed it. Like you just like put 13-year-old me into your arms and just like gave me a little there. So thank you for that. I really feel like there's so much that needs to be said to this younger demographic who's probably listening to all those influencers, bringing it back to like, this is what you're supposed to do. Don't do this. They're like, well, I'm 13. So that person seems like they know more than me. So I appreciate you saying that a lot.
And sadly, skinny talk is bad, and they are all on their screens for so long. So you put those two worlds together, and we're going to see some serious issues in 40 to 50 years, I'm pretty sure, with sarcopenia and osteoporosis with our girls if we don't get control of this.
So if if you're feeling pretty stressed, you've been in maybe apocalyptic freak out burnout zone, perimenopause or not, you're just like kind of overwhelmed. What would be the best science-backed recovery tool that we as women could use to get out of this like stress zone?
Rest is really important. Finding those moments where you can extract yourself from the stress zone is really key. I think, and I will put myself into this category, my response to stress is to stress my body more, typically with exercise, right? I'm feeling stressed. I'm going to go for some kind of like kick-ass hill run or something, right? And in the acute sense, that might make me feel better, right? Like I get to the end of the day, I'm just like, I just need to let this out to my Florence and the Machine.
Yes.
But really, if I'm listening to my body, what I probably needed to do was go for a walk and take some deep breaths and bring the stress level down. So I think finding that balance for women is really important. We, especially as we're talking, we're, people that work really hard, we are really excited about exercise. Oftentimes, and I won't put this on you, but I will put it on me, is that taking an easy day or doing nothing at all makes me feel really guilty. Like, oh man, like I didn't do the right
100%.
for my body
Yeah.
today. And I think we got to get out of that, team. Like, I think we got to figure out there's a time and a place to overstress your body, and there's a time and a place to pull back. And I think we are living in a time of chaos and recognizing that we also need rest and recovery and meditation and softness and sleep is
Mhm.
also really important.
Yeah,
I
I
think that
agree
is
with
a
that.
great one to end on because anything from this entire episode, like that wraps it up. Whether you're going to spend thousands on black market peptides or you're going to buy all the supplements for perimenopause, you heard it here from Dr. Rachel. Check your rest, check your sleep, and your Aura Ring first, and then maybe consider the gray market.
Yes.
Big levers first, team. Big levers first. Peptides are
Big
always
leaders.
a little lever, always.
Yes. And if there's one thing we hope you take away from today's episode, it's this: that if you relate to any of these experiences we talked about today, you're not alone. See how common they are? We all experience them. There's so many women out there struggling, and science is doing its best to keep up, and you deserve care that starts with understanding. So, thank you guys for tuning in to part one. You will not want to miss part two because we're giving the girls the honest, juicy truth about peptides.
What they are, what the science says or doesn't say, and when they'll be available for you to try. Huge thank you to Rachel for bringing the nuance, the honesty, and just the woman compassion that we needed for this conversation. And if you'd like to get in touch with Rachel or ask her any follow-up questions, we will provide her contact email and Instagram in the show notes.
So,
Okay.
thank you, Dr. Rachel, so much for coming on our podcast. This was so informative and just like a really amazing conversation.
Thank you so much for having me and for platforming science and for talking about how we bridge the gap between what we've got going on in the lab and what we've got going on in the gym.
And we're not trying to be teachers' pets here, but we are taking a page out of Rachel's book, and we're actually going to take a pause with this podcast. We're going to take a little season break, and we wanted to end it with a bang, which I'm so glad we did. Thank you for being here. And if you need a little break in your life, look around. Let's support each other doing that. If you see a friend or if your friend's canceling plans because they want to get a couple hours of sleep, support them in that. If you see a friend who might be struggling, allow them to just rest and go for a walk.
But don't worry, our break will be short lived. We'll be back the first week of August. And as always, please connect with us on Instagram at overt_thinking podcast, at Brianna Lamb, at Kelsey Michelle, and we're on YouTube. And we will see you in the next episode.